folks, welcome to week 14 of DMD 105, Digital Design Foundations. All right, so we are nearing the end of the semester here. So even though this week, week 14, is our last full work week for this class, we do have one more week. Week 15 is our finals week. So be sure to go to announcements and check out the final presentation guidelines for what we're doing in week 15. Week 15 is finals week, so week 14 is the last week of full class. So what are we doing this week in week 14? Well, we got a few different things going on. For one thing, you guys are still working on your vector celebrity portrait, which is your very last project for this class. Now, of course, this is done in Adobe Illustrator. But while you're working on that, we are introducing and exploring our third piece of software, Adobe XD. Now, last week, we went over the basics of Adobe XD. You guys have hopefully been playing around with it, learning the basics, practicing with it. And this week, we're going to continue in that. And we're going to pick up with the idea of content layout and planning in Adobe XD. So the idea of actually getting actual content from photography to graphics to typography to a variety of different things into your Adobe XD document and layout. Now, last week in week 13, we talked about the use of grids. If you remember this handout here, about different grid types. Now, of course, grid types can be used for both print and web design. And these different types of grid types, from a single column manuscript grid to a multi-column grid, which could be anywhere from 3 columns, could even be 2 columns, could be 7 columns. The number of columns is irrelevant. It is a column grid. All the way to modular grids, which are very common in web design, as well as hierarchical grids. So we went over those last week. Hopefully you have been thinking about grids, looking into grids, and just understanding that before you start to place content onto a document or onto a website or onto a artboard or workspace, you have to plan the space first, right? And like we talked about last week, this is like trying to get a bunch of furniture into a room without first making some measurements and figuring out what's going to go where. All right, so this week we're going to hop into XD and just talk about how to actually work with actual content and elements through an example of a donut shop website that I put together. Obviously, this can be done a variety of different ways for a variety of different projects, but we're going to start there. Meanwhile, you do have a consumable this week, this video here, Adobe XD Intro and Basics. Now, last week we had a couple Intro to Adobe XD videos, so this is really coming at some of the same content, but from a different point of view. I really want you to spend these last few weeks of the semester exploring with Adobe XD and getting comfortable with the program, and really sort of understanding how it's similar to programs you've already used, and yet different at the same way. So that when you go forward into other design classes or other digital media courses, you'll be ready to use the software to make some stuff, right? All right, so make sure you watch this video. All right, so I'm going to hop over here into Adobe XD. This here is the site. I'm going to show you how we put this together. So this is the finished version. This is one of the screens, right? But first I want to sort of demonstrate that use of grid. Now, this is constructed with a column grid that also has some modular elements, and I'll show you what I mean. So if I turn on the grid, right, you can see the guidelines that show up here, and this is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 column grid. Now, it does have some deviation from a typical column grid, in that the column widths are all exactly the same size. Column 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are all the same width. The gutters between the columns, however, are different in some places. So the gutter between column 1 and 2, which is that space between the columns, that's the same size as the gutter between column 2 and 3. Now, when we get to column 3 and 4, you'll notice the gutter is extra wide, right? This is actually more than double the width of 2 of the previous gutters. Now, so that's a deviation. So just because grids can look uniform and have the same measurements throughout all of their content containers or all of their grid areas doesn't mean you can't make some adjustments, right? You start out with a grid, and then that lays down the rules. And then from there, you can break the rules if it makes sense. But you have to start with a grid. You have to start with a plan. And so the reason why I widened this area is because I wanted to have a visual space for the viewer to kind of pause, right? You come into the website, and remember, we read left to right, top to bottom. That's kind of how we go through things in this part of the world. So our brain is pre-wired to do that. And so you see the logo for the donut shop, and then you find the major navigation points over here, which would take you to the other pages. And then you start working your way across the website from an upper left to a lower right corner pattern. And this gets you through the various columns. You would see the secondary type up top here, right? Best donuts ever. And then you see this nice photograph. Now, this could be a slideshow. It could be a stagnant photograph. It doesn't really matter. But you would sort of want to see that. Well, that's a lot to take in, right? Now, granted, all of this happens in seconds or fractions of seconds. But that is how the human brain works when sort of digesting content. And so now that I've understood the name of the place, I understand how the navigation works, I read the tagline, and I saw this great photo, then your brain needs like a second to rest before it gets more information. And so that's why I widened the gutter between columns 3 and 4, because it sort of gives your brain a little bit of a breather before you move on to, oh, let me read about the donuts, and let me look at another photo, and then I've got to come all the way back over here and decide what page I want to land on. And I know it doesn't take that long. Your brain functions very quickly, but it always helps to give the viewer a place to rest. Okay? So that's why I did that. And then we have the next column, column 4, and then that same gutter space that we saw back here, and then column 5. Now notice that the margin is the same all the way around. The margin space is a little wider than the gutter space, and it's on the right and the left as well as the top and the bottom. So this is basically a 5-column adjusted grid. Okay, so it's adjusted because I spread it out a little bit here, but it's still 5 equidistant columns. Now, it does have some modularity to it because I've also included some rows, right? There is a row that runs along the top for the header, and then there is a gutter space between the header and the next container, which holds this photograph of the girl holding the donut up to her face. And then the logo takes up 2 rows, right? Because it's fatter, it's taller than the single row. It's about double the height. And then the sections that hold the navigation links are all about the same height as the top banner. So nice equi-spacing all the way around. Then we have the footer at the bottom, which holds some other information, which is about the same height as the gutter itself. So nice, evenly structured. All right, so next we are going to get into how to actually construct this in XD. So last time we talked about the basic functionality of XD. Here I'm sort of applying our gutter to it. But the next thing we're going to do is we are going to take a look at how we can construct these different screens, add content to it, and whatnot. So we'll take a little quick break here and then come right back and show you how to add all this content in, use different containers, construct type containers, use colors, etc., etc. All right, so let's get rolling with that, replicate that. However, if you went ahead and made your wireframe like I did here in Adobe Illustrator, then this is where we can really introduce the idea that Adobe XD, at its heart, while it is a web prototyping tool, it is really a layout tool. And as such, and similar to other layout tools like Adobe InDesign, it really manages to handle a variety of different file types really well. It handles vector graphics, it handles pixel graphics, it handles typography, and it actually does a much better job than even Adobe InDesign of copy-paste, drag and drop, and maintaining the attributes of everything that you either drag onto it or copy-paste into it. What do I mean? Let's demonstrate. So go over to Illustrator. Here is my wireframe, right? And of course my wireframe is made up of a series of rectangles or rounded rectangles in different shades of gray. I have my guides in place. Now if I simply lasso my entire collection of wireframe objects here, select all of them and copy them, and then go over to XD, because my artboard is the exact same size in Illustrator and over here in XD, and then hit paste, it is going to drop in my wireframe pieces perfectly nicely, and I can just center them on the artboard. They are already scaled properly so that they fit within the margin that I determined in my wireframes. So you can see if I go back and forth between Illustrator and XD, looks the same. Now the nice thing is this is not just a flat image that I can design on top of it. You'll see over here in my layers palette, it came in as a group. So it groups them together, puts them in a folder, And then if I click on the folder, it shows me the group. But of course, if I want to, I can ungroup them. All I have to do is right-click on the group and go to Ungroup, and it ungroups them, and now I have all these individual items. So now if I click on it, even though they're all inside the folder, and then I click a couple of times, I can get the header bar, which is known as path 1, this content cube here, this content cube here, so on and so forth. And if you really want to be super organized and persnickety in your web design, and I totally recommend doing that, organization is tantamount in web design, you can click on each of these and rename them over here. Remember, a lot of times in XD, when you're creating prototypes, you will be sharing this file with your web developer, who will be doing all the complex coding for the website. And so the more organized you are, the easier it is for them to work with your prototype. Even if you're sharing it with other team members for other reasons, it's much more useful to name things and organize things than it is to just let people guess at it. So I can simply name this header, right, because that is the header bar that I created. And this guy down here is the footer, so we'll call that footer. And of course, every time I click on one, it lights up in the layers palette, so it's easy to find, right? And then this here is the big gray rectangle in the back for the main navigation. So I'm just going to call this one nav, and we'll call it nav1, right? Just for some level of organization. And then I have this rectangle here, so we'll call that nav2. And then this guy here we'll call nav3. You know, you're just adding some organization to your stuff. Then this here is a content box, or at least that's what I have in mind for it. That's what I'm thinking. So we'll call that content 1, and then this one here, content 2, and lastly, content 3. And just in a couple of seconds here, you've got it all nice and organized, right? Now, it goes beyond just replicating your wireframe. We're going to be able to use these shapes as actual containers to hold things. So let's talk about that and how we're going to do this. So we'll keep this live and active, and we'll get going from here. Now, I am going to take a look at my folder of images, which I have here. Remember, these are the optimized ones. These are the ones that are ready to rock and roll for web consumption. And I'm specifically going to grab my header image here. Now, similar to InDesign, the content shapes that you create in XD will hold images inside them, right? They won't sit on top. They'll go inside like mats, like masks almost. So all you've got to do is right from your folder. Now, these images have already been optimized. I know they look good. I don't have to do any adjustments to them. I'm going to pick up my header image, and because I already selected the header rectangle at the top here, right, it's active, you can see the bounding box. I'm going to pick up the image from my file collection and drop it in, and watch what happens when I go over it. Boop, turns blue, right? It's just waiting to receive that photo. So when I let it go, it drops the photo inside the rectangle. Now the photo is sized perfectly, so when I double click on it, you don't see any extra photo. But if the photo was bigger, you would see the rest of the photo extending north and south of it, or to the right or the left. So I can make some adjustments. Now the other thing I can do is, again, click on that, and if I want to resize the box that it lives in, I can just simply grab the anchor point and shrink it down. And so notice that as I'm shrinking it, I'm getting those smart guides popping up that shows me that I'm lining up with things nice and neat. So make sure your stuff's organized. So I'm going to drag it over to here because I'm going to leave this white space over here for the logo. Now the next thing I want to do is, even though I originally thought I was going to need all of these rectangles for navigation, I would really rather use this space for my logo, and I really don't need all this navigation. So I'm going to double click on this rectangle and shrink it down, so I can leave a nice big square space up here for my logo. Now let's go over to the logo, and again I have that in Illustrator living in my style guide here. So there's my logo, and click it. It's already grouped together. All these items are grouped. So I could drag it over to XD, but I'm just going to copy it. I'm just going to do Command-C, copy it, go back over to XD, and make sure that you have nothing active, right? So click in the gray space so nothing is active, because we don't want to drop the logo into something. I just want to drop it on top of things. So then I'll paste it, and then there's my logo. Now what's excellent about this is not only does it drop my logo in a beautiful vector format, But if I double click on the logo, it opens it up as a group. See that over here? And then if I keep clicking it, you can see that I can drill down to the individual objects. So if I just want to work on the inside of the donut, I can literally change the color over here if I wanted to and make it a completely different color. Now, I don't want to do that, but you get the idea. So not only does it copy and paste it, but it maintains all of its editability from Illustrator, even down to the font. So I choose this one here, and it actually shows me the font right here. So not only can I change the font, but I can even change what it says. I can go in and change it from Dave's to, Dawn's, and go from there. Maybe Dawn bought Dave out and she took over the donut business. I don't know. So you get the idea. So not only does it really handle great file type conversion from drag and drop and copy paste, but it keeps them completely editable. And again, once you drop stuff in, make sure you're naming things, right? So this is my logo. It named it Group 7, which is not super useful. So we'll call this logo. And of course, we can fold up the logo like that. So now I can have easy access to it. So anyway, now I can line it up. And again, smart guides are helping me out here. And I can put it where I want it, right? Can resize it so that it lines up nicely here. And maybe I want to leave it like that. So we'll tap it over a little bit so that it's kind of centered. Make sure it lines up at the top, and boom, I got my logo in. Pretty great, right? Now, from there, I'm going to do some other stuff. Now, I want to use the same font right here from Dave's on the navigation. Now, I know over here, back in my style guide, I said that I was going to use alternate Gothic for headlines and then Avenir for the other type. But I do want to use this font that I used for the name Dave's, right? Which is a different font entirely. I want to use that in limited use. I don't want to put it over here in the main content area. For there, I'm going to use Avenir and my other fonts. But I want to do it here. Now, the easiest way to do this, right, I don't have to I could make a new text box, right? I could grab text and make a new text box and start from scratch, or I could simply duplicate Dave's and bring it down into these other navigation areas. And remember, this is grouped together. So I can just click on this a few times until I get down to the text box that contains Dave, and then I can copy it and click over here in the gray space, so I'm disconnecting everything, and then paste it, and then boom, there it is. So I now have a duplicate, so I'm going to drag that down, and now from here I can use the option drag feature to make duplicates, and I'm just going to put Dave's all the way down, right? And we'll do that, and then I'm going to change what each one says. Actually, the first thing I should do is make sure they're all center justified, so that as I'm changing the names, they're not running off to one side, they work in the middle. So I'm going to select all of those text boxes just by shift-clicking them. Go over here to the palette, center justify everything. So now, when I change what it says, we can type in specials. Yes, I know it's too big. We'll fix that in a minute. And we have different types of donuts. We have cake donuts, and we have frosted donuts, and we have filled donuts. I apologize if everybody's getting hungry. So now we want to change the font size of these so that they fit neatly inside here. But you don't want them to be different font sizes, right? You want them to be the same size throughout. Good rule of thumb is you take your longest word, which in this case is specials, and you decide on the font size for that, and then you apply that to everything else. So right now it's a little more than 93, so let's go down to 80 and see if that fits. It's still a little big, so we'll go down to 75. Yeah, that fits nicely. So now I can shift-click all of these, and I know that 75 will work nicely. Make it 75. They all fit. Now, I don't want to leave them this blue-green color. I'm going to make them white. So shift-click all of them, go over here to the palette, and go to fill, bring it up to white, and now we're ready to go. Excellent. So now I want to start assigning some colors to things. Now, I did have this color palette back over here, right? So since we know that we can copy and paste things, what if I just grab my whole color palette, right? I'm going to just lasso my color palette, copy it, bring that over to XD, and I'm going to kind of slide to the left a little bit here and drop it off and then put it over here on the left. so that I'll have access to it, right? And again, it groups it together, and it's in the pasteboard, you'll see, because here we're on the home page, and then here it's on the pasteboard. So your layers are specific to their location, okay? So this scratch space is referred to as the pasteboard, and so I'm going to just name that color palette. So I'll have it for later. Now, why am I dragging my color palette over here? Well, because I want to use the eyedropper tool to be able to just sample my colors from here as I'm going. Now, I could have written down what the RGB formulas were for each of these and then plug that in over here in the main palette, but it's much easier to use the eyedropper tool, right? So, for example, I want to select these dark gray rectangles, and I'm going to go over here to fill, grab the eyedropper tool, and I'm going to sample this color here. Boom, very nice. And then I'm going to grab the lighter gray rectangle in the back, grab the eyedropper tool, and we'll go with the lighter purple color. Boom, very nice. All right, so now we're getting some synergy in terms of color here. Now, there are some special effects you can add in XD. There's not a boatload of them. It's not like Illustrator that has a ton of effects. But there's some very useful ones that sort of help add a little three-dimensionality and make things interesting. So I'm going to choose each of my type boxes here for my main navigation. And I'm going to go over here, and under fill, then there's border, then we have shadow. So I'm going to put a shadow on underneath each of these. And then there's some adjustments you can make with shadow, right? If you click on it, you can choose how opaque the shadow is. So I want to make it a little darker so we can absolutely see it. And you can even change the color of the shadow. This is just a black shadow. I don't really want to use any black in here. So instead, I'm going to grab this eyedropper tool and pick up that dark blue color, which is useless in front of this blue, but then I can go back over to the color picker and darken it up so that it works for all of them, but it's not black, right? It's just sort of a dark version of that blue. You can also adjust the depth of the shadow, its location based on the X and Y axis, so you can make all those adjustments there, but I'm pretty happy with it like that. So that looks good. Then again, click in the scratch space so everything's sort of deactivated. Kind of the same rule of thumb you would do in Illustrator, right? When you're done working with something, you do that. Okay, next I'm going to drop some photos and some text in here. So I'm going to grab this content container here that again came right from my wireframes. And I'm going to go back to my collection of photos, and we're going to pick up this photo of this woman here. Let's say she's the manager of Dave's, and we'll put her in. And again, drag the photo right from your collection into the container. And there she is. And again, if I double click on it, see how the remainder of the photograph is visible on the left and right. So if I wanted to kind of recenter her, I could until I was happy with it, and then just click. Then you're in good shape. Now, any content container that contains a photo, I want it to have a shadow so it looks a little three-dimensional. So I'm going to choose that container again, go over here to the adjustment palette, turn on the shadow, and same thing. I'm going to increase the opacity of it a little bit so it's a little more visible. And this one I'm going to leave black so that it's a bit of a gray because it makes more sense against a white background. Okay, next, going to drop another photo into this content container here, and we'll grab one of our donut collections. Maybe we'll get this guy. Move this over a little so I can see better. Drop him in. Come on. Oh, I got the spinning beach ball of death. Give me a second. All right, there we go. All right, so that's in. And again, I can double click it and kind of adjust what I'm showing inside the frame. That looks pretty good. Click that. Now I'm going to add some text, right? So this content container here is meant to hold text, but I don't really want to, keep the gray. But I'm going to leave it there for now because it gives me a place to start from. So I am going to grab my text tool over here. And just like in Illustrator, you can either click once and start typing, or you can click and drag out a text box. So I'm going to click and drag out a text box. And I'm going to make it the same size as this gray rectangle. And go back to the selection arrow here. Oop. Go back to the, hold on, let me grab my text tool again, do this. Okay, so I'm going to put some text in it just temporarily so that it lives for a second. And go ahead and drag out the text box so that it's about the same size as the gray content container. I can change it later, of course, but I wanted to eat up about the same space. Now, I put in just a couple of letters so that I could see how big it is. It's too big, right? What it does is XD remembers your last typographic adjustments and then applies them to your next typographic item. So I need to change this. So remember over here in our style guide, I decided for body copy to go with Avenir Book. So we're going to change that to Avenir Book. Go with that, and you can just start typing if you want, and it will find it for you, or you can go to the pull-down menu. So there's Avenir, and it's black, so I want to change it to Book. And 75 points is way too big, so we're going to make it like 22 points, which is much better for a paragraph on a website. Okay, we'll deal with the color of the font. Next, we'll go from white to something else. So let's grab our eyedropper tool, and I'm going to grab my dark color from my color palette because that's a good font color for body copy. And we're going to left justify it. Okay, so now that we're ready to rock and roll here, now we can put in the type. Now I could hand type in something, but I have my lorem ipsum over here. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab some lorem ipsum, which is just going to be a placeholder. And we'll copy that and go over here to XD and paste it. And that goes in, and I do have to make some adjustments to it because the leading wasn't adjusted, so we'll do that. Go over here, put in 0. Okay, so now that's better. So that sets it to the default leading. So that looks pretty good, right? And then I'm going to put in a header. So I'm going to go down one line and put in about our donuts. Okay. And since that's a header, I'm going to use what I said I would do over here in Illustrator. I'm going to go with alternate Gothic. So with that highlighted, go over here and start typing in alternate Gothic. There it is. And increase the size of it a little bit so it's much bigger. Okay, maybe a little bigger than that. Okay, that looks wonderful. And I'm going to change the color of that from that dark color to, I'm going to grab this blue-green color. Okay. And you can continue to adjust the type so that it's exactly the way you want it until you're happy with it. Now I can get rid of this gray content box behind it because I've already used it to frame up where I'm going. So I don't need it anymore. That can go away. And now I've got my text box, which I can adjust. I can go ahead and lower the height a little bit so that it fits better into the space. And that looks pretty nice. All right. Great, we're good to go. Now, of course, if this was actual copy, you would want to go in and, play around with the rag edge, make sure it's nice and neat. Well, that doesn't really work. So that's good, and sort of keep going from there. But since this is just dummy copy, we'll leave it alone as is. Okay, next, we're going to put some text up here in the top, right? So I'm going to grab the type tool, and again, we're going to actually start with the Dave type again, right? So we'll grab maybe a type box from our navigation, and we're going to duplicate that, just put it up here, and we can go ahead and change what it says. So this is going to be sort of like their call to action thing. Best donuts ever, right? And we can put that in the middle, and then the bounding box for type allows you to resize it by simply dragging out the bottom. So we'll do that and pick it up and put it sort of roughly in the center. Use your smart guides. Okay, now I'm going to get rid of the shadow. I don't want that, so I'm going to uncheck it. But I also don't want it to be white type on a background. So you'll notice over here under Appearance, not only can I change the fill, the border, or the shadow, but I can also add some blending modes. You remember these. They live in the Layers palette in both Illustrator and Photoshop. So same blending modes you're already used to. So I'm going to go with Overlay. I love Overlay. It sort of does a nice job of embedding it into the background. But then I'm going to add a border or a stroke to it. It's funny, in Illustrator they refer to the outline as a stroke, and in XD they refer to it as a border. I do kind of wish they were consistent with their terminology, but they're not. So I'm going to make the border white, and I'm going to increase the size of the border to 2 pixels, and then that makes it stand out a little bit more. Okay, next, the footer. So we're going to grab that container, and again, change the fill. This time we're going to go with that green color, and add a little shadow to that too. And And, oh, I'm going to grab my picture container. I forgot to add the shadow to that. So we'll do that. And then lastly, we're just going to put some text into the bottom here. So again, grab some text, and we can put in whatever we want. Remember, start out with just some dummy text, and then you can go over here and change it. So we want Avenir again, and we're going to go with Avenir book, and we're going to change the size a lot to like 14, maybe even less, maybe a little more, maybe like 20. Okay, Avenir book, right? And make sure it's left justified, and it's already white, and we're going to get rid of the border. We don't need that. Okay, now we can go back and type what we want to say, right? So we got Dave's Delectable Donuts, 1445 Main Street, Somerville, Mass. I don't know the zip code in Somerville. I'm going to make it up. 02145 123 and then phone number. Right. So, you know, footer information. So you can put that in there. Make sure it's nice and centered. Line it up where you want it. Okay, so now some cleanup, right? So you want to group some stuff together that needs to be grouped together. So for example, our footer bar and our text should be grouped together. So we'll do that. So that's grouped. So now when we check it, you'll see it says group 7. We can call that footer. Got it. And then you want to go through your layers and make sure everything's named, right? So everything has a real name. It doesn't just say, you know, shape or whatever. So if you're not sure what something is, click it. And then some of it you probably want to leave because this entire group is the logo. So that's okay. We can fold that up. That's fine as long as it says logo. And then this larger group here is the layout. So we can keep that, but you can also ungroup it if you want, which allows you to figure out sort of other areas. So get yourself cleaned up, but pretty much everything is named nicely. Okay, so looks pretty good, right? Now, the next thing we're going to do is, so let's say we're happy with this. It's our home page. We've spent a lot of time on it. I realize I just kind of breezed through that quickly, but you know, you're really happy with it. You've spent time with it. You've showed it to a couple people. You get some good feedback. Now we want to work on the other pages for our website. So the easiest way to do that is similar to what we do in Adobe InDesign with creating master pages. We're going to use this as our starting point, and if you click the name of your artboard and then do Option Drag, you can duplicate it, and then this can be the next page. This could be the specials page, and you can continue to do this, right? Click, Option Drag, right? And then this could be the cake pages, and so on and so forth. And now I can go back and change the details that will be attributable to each of those pages. Okay, so that is essentially the design phase of Adobe XD. Obviously, your site's going to be very different than mine. This is just a demonstration. But just to show you how versatile Adobe XD is, how well it works with other programs like Adobe Illustrator, and how easy it is to drag and drop files that you've already optimized right into it. Pretty simple, great stuff. Feel free to leave things into the pasteboard or the scratch space. Like I like leaving the color palette out there because I'll use it as I go along. It's easy for eyedroppering things. So now you got okay, so hopefully you found that helpful. I want you practicing with Adobe XD. You can make anything you want. You can make up a website. You can just do something for fun. Again, this is not attached to a project in this class, but I really want you to get familiar with the software. So hop on over to those various stock photography sites, grab a bunch of photos, and just put together some dummy type and some imagery and some graphics, and just really get used to working in a given space in a structured grid-based way, and then working with content, okay? So hopefully make some time to play with that, and I will see you guys soon.